I'm Tom Leonard, the university librarian. It's a real pleasure to welcome Jim Neal here, who is, as you know, currently the Vice President for Information Services and University Librarian at Columbia. He also leads the Electronic Publishing Initiative there, the Columbia Center for New Media, Teaching and Learning, the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship, the Copyright Advisory Office, and the Center for Human Rights Documentation and Research. He has indeed demonstrated, I've noticed, unusual breadth, showing leadership in the information age on campuses that aspire to be big-time football powers, Penn State, Notre Dame, Indiana, as well as schools where football studies are not so advanced, City University of New York, Johns Hopkins, and now Columbia. I have worked with Jim on the boards of the Research Libraries Group and the Association of Research Libraries, covering everything from, at least what was to me, arcane international copyright rules to the aesthetic qualities of that touchdown Jesus in South Bend. Jim is interested in everything we touch as universities, and you are in for a treat. Jim Neal.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here. I think this is my second visit to the Berkeley campus, but it was many years ago that I had the privilege to visit the libraries and walk across the campus. But it's also an honor to be part of your thinking about the future of the libraries at Berkeley and to follow on a great colleague, Betsy Wilson, who I know had an opportunity to meet and talk with you several weeks ago. There's a story that I often use, which I think is particularly relevant in the context of what we're going to talk about today. And it's the story about the Irish playwright, George Bernard Shaw, who is opening a new play in London. He writes a letter to Winston Churchill saying, "Dear Mr. Churchill, I would really welcome your attendance at the opening night's performance of my new play in London. And I'm sending you 2 tickets. One ticket is for you, Mr. Churchill, and the second ticket is for a friend, if you have one." Well, Churchill, in his own way, wrote back quickly and said, "Well, dear Mr. Shaw, unfortunately, I have another commitment the night of the opening performance, but I would be very appreciative if you sent me 2 tickets to the second night's performance, if there is one." In some ways, what we're putting on the table today, and in your extended conversations, is Library of the Future, will there be one? But perhaps more relevant is, will it have an impact? Will it fulfill an institutional mission? And that's what I've chosen to focus on in my comments today. I like to allude to the metaphor of revolution because I think it does fit quite effectively into the current state of academic research libraries. David Close, in his book, The Meaning of Revolution, talks about revolution in terms of its cataclysmic quality, how it sort of unsettles our security and our convictions. And I think there is a sense of discontent or dissettlement, if you will, in what we are and what we do and where we're going. Perhaps more importantly is Kuhn's view that the changes that we experience are really cumulative in nature. He developed the term paradigm to address that. And in many ways, we can identify in our working environments an extraordinary array of trends and developments that one might argue will tip us in powerful new directions. And I'd like to talk about some of those. And third, because I did study at the Russian Institute at Columbia for many years, I can't let go of Marx and his theory of knowledge, his theory of epistemology, where he argues that ideas do not exist on their own. They only have relevance, they only have quality, they're only real when they're translated into action. And he makes a very important distinction between quantitative change and qualitative change. A pot of water over a flame that intellectually we know is changing in terms of its temperature, but only when it reaches a critical point, the boiling point, when liquid changes to gas, does, in his mind, a true revolution take place. And so we are bubbling in many ways towards, I think, some really interesting and fundamental shifts. The former CEO at OCLC, K. Wayne Smith, once gave me one of the most wonderful definitions of trends I've ever heard. He noted that in 1997, there were 18,652 individuals working in the United States as Elvis impersonators, and that by 2007, that number had increased to 56,207. And if that trend continues, by the year 2017, 1 out of 3 people in this room will be working. Turn around and try to figure out who. But I think we could all come up with our list, if you will, of contextual library trends. And the ones that I've chosen to tease out are on 2 screens. I think that we all recognize the opportunity and the importance of focusing on individual needs and preferences, building customized library services and capabilities, a real strong commitment to general and barrier-free access across all arenas in which openness is an important value, a sense of ATM in all of our service environments. Go to the bank and take out the money, go to the grocery store and scan the stuff that I bought, get my airplane ticket out of a machine. This self-service expectation and philosophy is an important part of all service environments. A sense of constant change, of sort of hybrid structures and hybrid approaches, a theme of mutability that I'll pick up a little bit tomorrow at the Library 2.0 conference. The pressure for individual and organizational productivity and the role that we play in supporting our students, faculty, and administrations. A recognition that iterative and user-driven design and development, a renewed focus, if you will, on new tools for measuring and advancing usability. Assessment being pushed at us from all levels of accountability, new measures of relevance and new measures of impact that governments and donors and many others are asking us to apply. Questions whether we are penetrating our markets, whether we are diversifying our markets, whether we're delivering the right products to the right people in the right way. Too much strategic planning, not enough strategic action. A recognition that we need much more agility, more linking of what we say is important to our resources, and more alignment with university priorities. We all know the strategic plans that decorate offices. We all know that the true test of a strategic plan is the library budget. We put our money where we think we can make a difference and on what we think is important. We have to, I think, develop more rigorous vision to action, more rigorous concept to market. This requires, I think, more careful consideration of risk capital, how we invest, sustainability when we develop projects, and how we look at business planning for the programs, services, and collections that we build and develop. We put a lot of kumbaya focus in our community on collaboration, when in fact I think we don't always understand the fierce competition which is part of our world. The competition for collections, the competition for people, for resources, for grants, for visibility. And that competitive environment is one that I think is not a negative characteristic in my view, but one which will increasingly characterize library success going forward. I used to depend on my success as a library administrator being measured by my ability to take the budget at the beginning of the year, allocate it properly, and spend it in a way that didn't leave the library in the red at the end of the fiscal year. I think I'm increasingly less evaluated on the basis of resource allocation and more on the basis of resource attraction or resource development. Both internal reallocation of funds, external recruitment of funds, and entrepreneurial initiatives and services that may or may not bring new attention and new positive attention and new resources. So this is enough. I think the groundwork in terms of a variety of important library trends that will color in very interesting and important ways where we are going. The academic and research library will clearly continue to focus on getting, organizing, finding, delivering, answering, helping people learn about, and preserving information. These functions are fundamental to what we do within the academy and what we do in the larger teaching and learning and scholarly communities. But I will argue that these core library services are being increasingly supplemented by an array of changing library roles. Roles which I think shift our boundaries a bit and dramatically pull us into arenas where we may not have the requisite experience, expertise, and outlook. I think we've learned to be much more effective consumers, both individually and collectively, buying and making available the content and the technologies that our communities rely on. I think we also are very important intermediaries and aggregators of information on behalf of the learning and scholarly communities that we serve. We're beginning to learn that material information of relevance and quality on the web may be as important as the monograph published by the university press, and therefore getting it, organizing it, and archiving it and making our community aware of its relevance and impact, I think is increasingly important. Some of us are creating new innovative modes of electronic scholarly publishing, and there's a conference going on right now on campus looking at the Ithaca report and the role of the university as publisher. We are building new approaches to our role as educators, reaching beyond traditional bibliographic instruction, information literacy roles, and finding new capacities for librarians and other library professionals in the classroom. We have always been, in my view, and I'll come back to this later, a passionately information-poor information profession. We are not willing and able to carry out the gathering and the sharing of new knowledge for our community to serve our decision-making and to really build the type of R&D organizations that ultimately result in the type of technology transfer capacity that I think libraries, particularly academic research libraries, need to embrace. We have lots of assets in libraries. We have space, we have expertise, we have content, we have traffic, both physically and electronically, and only recently, I think, have we learned how to leverage that asset to produce new visibility and new resources. And therefore, the degree to which we can embrace an entrepreneurial spirit and capability, I think, is increasingly important to our future role, but also our future success. And we are finding ways, both individually and collectively, to influence national and global laws and legislation which touch on our ability to serve our users. We operate in the public interest. We're one of the few agencies, organizations that does that, and therefore we are becoming much more successful, much more knowledgeable as information policy advocates. So what we might say is that we can project a shifting vision of the academic research library. We will be legacy. We will be responsible for centuries of societal records in all formats. And that legacy responsibility continues to grow. Libraries like Columbia, libraries like UC Berkeley will continue to capture the world's output of scholarly work, and we know that more and more of that continues to be analog-based. We will be infrastructure. We will be sort of the essential combination of space, of technology, of systems, and expertise. We'll be repository, ensuring the long-term availability and usability of our cultural and intellectual output. I think we still will have that role of portal, serving as a sophisticated and intelligent gateway to an expanding array of multimedia, interactive content and tools. I think we're going to be enterprise, much more concerned with innovation, with competition, with risk. And I think we're also going to be public interest, defending and expanding intellectual freedom, confidentiality, fair use, barrier-free access to information. So to sort of think in a little bit more detail about both these ongoing roles and responsibilities, as well as what I would project are important new roles that we need to embrace, I began to think about a set of what I would call imperatives, things that we need to understand and act on more aggressively and successfully. One of my favorite movies is Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1. And for those of you who saw that movie, may recall that at one point, Mel Brooks takes on the role of Moses. And he's coming down from the mountain carrying 3 tablets. And he says, "Children of Israel, I have 15," and he trips, and one of the tablets crashes to the ground, and he picks himself up, and he dusts himself off, and he picks up the 2 tablets, and he says, "Children of Israel, I have 10 commandments." Well, probably no more important event in social history. I think we all would wonder what those 5 commandments are that we lost. Well, I have 30 commandments, if you will, imperatives, which I believe will increasingly define our library programs and our library aspirations. And I'd like to run through those 30, and you'll see that they change character as I talk about them. The first imperative, I would argue, is building the network, the essential infrastructure across our universities. I think the library needs to guarantee that this network, as it's developed, is characterized by connectivity, by reliability, by capacity and performance. We need to be sure that there is an adequate level of security, knowing who I am and allowing me and our faculty and students to do the things that they are authorized to do. But we also need to see the network as enabling new applications, robust, multimedia, interactive, and distributed activities that take advantage of the network. Too often, librarians and libraries are not at the table when important decisions are being made about the network infrastructure at universities. Secondly, we need to participate in enterprise system development, those efforts to improve the administrative work of our institutions, to replace the sort of disparate and analog systems, the legacy programs that still dominate so many of our campuses. The ERP urge is linked clearly to requirements for business reengineering, a productivity mandate, which demands the integration of all the functions, the web-based distribution of work and services, and a reduced capacity for local customization. Hopefully, as we build this ERP, we'll be sensitive to open source strategies, which I think are increasingly part of the rhetoric of higher education. But we know that ERP projects are replete with financial horror stories. And we know that CIO heads roll as a result of the delayed and sometimes more expensive development of these ERP systems. We need to find opportunities for service enhancements and productivity gains in these new administrative systems, and to understand that these are massive financial and staff investments, sometimes, in fact, often, at the expense of institutional academic priorities. Libraries and librarians are rarely at that table. We need to participate in efforts to manage identity and security. The intensity of the threat is played out on the front pages of newspapers all over the US. It's obvious that we face daily attacks at our institutions, and we must cope with persistent virus and break-in conditions. We need to be worried about the efficiency of the network. We need to be worried about the maintenance of our system operations. We need to be worried about data integrity and protection, which can be so easily compromised. And clearly, the issues of identity theft, which are real in terms of its impact on individuals and political suicide for many institutions. The challenge is to protect our resources in ways that are responsive to academic cultures, as well as to the business and legal requirements of the university. How can we deliver a rich array of information under appropriate access controls and detection systems? When does identity and security come in conflict with our core values as libraries and librarians? I also think we need to enhance and organize for disaster preparation and continuity. At Columbia, the buzzword today is pandemic. How do we deal with a situation when 75% of the staff can't come to work and the students can't leave their residence halls or dorms? How do we make sure that business continuity proceeds? How do we be sure that we can recover businesses that have been lost? This means redundancy of our IT capacity for critical systems. It means having in place refreshed and tested policies and procedures. It means assigning responsibilities for handling emergencies. And it means much more rigorous auditing of our procedures in the area of records management programs as we protect vital institutional data and systems. Most academic libraries are not at the table, and most are grossly underprepared in this area. We talk a lot in academic research libraries about building the digital library. And too often, I think, in the development of this capacity, we continue to focus on quality equaling content, and not enough on quality equaling content plus functionality. Not just getting at the information, but what I, as a student and faculty member at this institution, can do with that information. Our biggest digital library is our published and licensed content, the electronic journals and books and other media that we secure from publishers. Some of us are building large caches of digital primary content drawn from our special collections. Some of us are capturing, curating, downloading, and archiving open web content, websites and documents of quality and relevance to the academic programs, our institution. Some of us are taking responsibility for institutional content, either as institutional repositories or as responsible for university archives and records management programs. What we know is that this is increasingly multimedia in content. It does involve the integration of services like Access and Reference and document delivery and course reserve. And it often involves the integration of software tools, now so often really important for working with electronic text and working with spatial data, for example. Do we have the ability, I think, going forward, to build the type of digital libraries that embrace not only this rich array of content, but integrate the types of functionality and services that I think are increasingly important? So much of our thinking about digital information has been justified on the enhanced accessibility and availability of information when it is captured electronically and put online. So much of electronic work is taking text and putting it online, not really seriously embracing the power of searchability, of researchability, the dynamic and fluid nature of online information, the perhaps better, multidisciplinary nature of working online, the obvious capacity for collaboration and multimedia and linkability and interactivity, the ability of the user, the reader, to influence and change the information. To look at things as more intellectual and less focus on procedure, letting the machine take on a lot of those basic functions. The notion that when we work online, we can, in an encyclopedic way, do far more than we could ever even conceive of doing in print and analog ways. Just look at some of the scholarly databases that have been produced at this institution, and in my own experience, things like the Digital Scriptorium or the APIS Pepperology database, which brings together, obviously, advantages of accessibility and availability, but embeds a lot more digital image content and a lot more functionality than could ever be conceived in the analog traditional environments. I mentioned portals before, In some ways, I feel portals, particularly management portals and systems, are an outmoded technology and an outmoded concept. But I do think that we have that sort of gatewayed responsibility, handling all types of digital content, not having siloed access. Our goal, I think, must be the ability to deliver and find content, the ability to organize it through appropriate descriptive and metadata standards, making sure that we've got efficient content workflows and that we can create a university-wide integrated content management strategy. Portals are integrators. Portals are real-time processors. And I think they are important concepts still in helping us to organize and support the productive academic and administrative work that enables us to support a full array of university and scholarly programs. Libraries have traditionally fulfilled the preservation and archive mandate. We've recognized that in order to preserve something, you have to hold it. You have to get it. We sometimes don't see the relationship between our collection development efforts and our ability to preserve something. You can't preserve what you don't have. But we also have to be focused, having received it or having acquired it, that there is this continuing persistence, this access, the security or stewardship that necessarily goes into having responsibility for an object or for a digital record. This means not only managing our analog information, and one could argue that one of the things that we should do, particularly in our special collections area, is to make digital copies as a fundamental part of our stewardship responsibility. But as we build more digital conversion, either institutionally or in partnership with the search engine vendors, whether we are trying to manage more and more born digital information, recognizing the extraordinary problems of integrity and sustainability, and whether we have put in place robust disaster preparedness capabilities, these all add up to a remarkable commitment to ongoing availability as technology migrates and needs to be refreshed. We don't know what we're doing in this area, and we have a lot of work to do, and the leadership must come from institutions like UC Berkeley. The press today announced that Yale has signed on with Microsoft. We need to carefully assess the relationship between the academic research library and the search engine libraries. We wring our hands, we celebrate Google Print and Google Library. We look at the Open Content Alliance and now the Microsoft initiatives. How do we effectively participate? How do we set aside our anxiety about the impact on our role as research libraries in the broader, both in our institutional setting and in the broader scholarly community? How can we assist the resolution of the copyright challenge? How can we make Orphan Works, for example, a fundamental part of national copyright policy? Clearly, the focus today largely on English language book-based information will pale in complexity when we start wrestling with other formats, when the videos, the manuscripts, the data sets, the learning and teaching objects in our library and university collections come into play in these large search engine environments. I'll spend more time on Web 2.0 and Web 3.0 in the context of Library 2.0 at the conference tomorrow. But we'd all acknowledge that we are talking here about an extraordinary revolution in social networking and collective intelligence. The notion of permanent beta is something that I think librarians are very uncomfortable with. We don't know how to deal with the idea of the authorship revolution, that there is, in fact, a lot of people contributing a lot of stuff, and it is increasingly valued by readers all over the world. How do we look at software not as a product, but as a service? And how do we begin to get out ahead of what we could see as Web 3.0, where artificial intelligence and expert systems are integrated into the social networked environment. Let me digress briefly. A report was released this week by OCLC. Some of you may have seen the notification about it. It's called Sharing, Privacy, and Trust in Our Networked World. The results of a general public survey in 6 countries around the world and of library directors in the US. Here are some things what it said. The general public respondents and the US library directors surveyed do not currently see any role for libraries in a social networked world. The only thing they could cite as something we could do was to form book clubs. Libraries which are active in this arena were basically using social tools to engage users and establish web communities. This is largely through RSS feeds and blogs. Really, our traditional broadcasting services. Users are moving away from a generation of what might be called expert-based information systems and gravitating to sites designed for them and by them. Sites offering self-service, quick access, and limited rules. Definitely not Library 1.0. When does the social web become the web? Will librarians build a high-value presence on the web, a strong enough brand beyond books to compete? We're lagging. We're not leading. If convenience trumps quality, it is our responsibility to make quality convenient. If sharing trumps privacy, it is our responsibility to make privacy shareable. Library 2.0, too often in our heads, is about wikis, about blogs, about mashups, about podcasts. It's about integrated, user-friendly self-service. This is already history. According to the OCLC study, it is about opening the doors to the production of the web, dismantling the current structures and inviting the users in to create their own content and to establish their own rules. It's a messy environment. Do we fit in, or are we going to stand in a parallel environment as we develop our library capacities? We need to enhance the student experience. If we listen to students, they clearly tell us what they want. They want network access anywhere, anytime. They want ubiquity. They want no lines and no limited hours. They want web-based services 24/7. They want places for experimentation and fun. They want sandboxes. And I don't think they want, for the most part, the information commons that we are creating. They want places to work with protection and anonymity. They recognize the importance of privacy space. They want support there when they want it. They recognize that there's a level of expertise that they may need to draw on. They know that they have some limitations in their fluency in the use of information. They do see it as something that's going to be ongoing skill, but I'm not sure they see us as those who can best develop that capacity. And perhaps one of the most difficult challenges we face, and one which we don't talk enough about, is the whole notion of what happens to our graduates when they leave our campuses, when they sort of get decoupled from the extraordinary resources that we've been able to make available to them. This postgraduate access, I think, is a very important capacity that we need to think more rigorously and collectively about. Where do we fit into the course management systems? Are we an integral player in its development? These systems involve content creation. They involve the storage and management of learning materials, the ability to find them, the ability to distribute and access them, and increasingly pressure in the area of rights management. We must integrate technology and electronic resources much more purposefully into teaching and learning, and plan for faculty involvement and incentives. If online learning involves interactivity, flexibility, improved administrative functionality, reduced cost of access, support for diverse learning styles, and innovation in learning, why are we not fundamentally at these tables? One way that I've seen this begin to develop at some institutions, and it has taken root at Columbia, has been the movement of responsibility for teaching and learning technologies into the libraries. Our Center for New Media Teaching and Learning has now expanded to almost 50 full-time staff who work with the library and the faculty to develop much more higher levels of service around technology in the classroom and on the development of online learning capacities. It was Clark Kerr, when he was at the University of California, who once described a faculty as a group of individual entrepreneurs held together by a common concern over parking. I tried to park on your campus today. What do faculty want? Well, if we listen, I think they tell us what they value. And if you can see this list, I'm not going to walk through it, but I think there are extraordinary opportunities for the research library to effectively fit into this inventory. Some things are obvious. Clearly, they want excellent library and technology support. They want high-quality instructional experiences. They want to make important contributions to the scholarly literature. They want opportunities to experiment with technology. But in achieving these goals, how would we define the relationship between library and faculty? Are we servants? Are we strangers? Are we partners? Are we peers? Clearly, they are focused more and more on massively distributed collaboration. Do we fit into the multi-dimensional, multidisciplinary global teams in which even more humanities scholars are now embraced? I think there's an extraordinary opportunity for us not only to be more aggressive and involved in the classroom, but to be much more involved in the library. I'm sorry, in the laboratory. And that, I think, is a challenge for the library, particularly the academic research library going forward. One aspect of this is our need to understand and support the needs of big science. When scientists map the universe, when they monitor the environment, when they investigate the gene, they build massive data sets, much of it unstructured. They want new tools for extraction, for distribution, for collaboration, for visualization, for simulation. Can we build the technologies, the standards, and the capacities to support this new science? Can libraries add value to this process? The National Science Foundation thinks so. In their latest call for proposals in the e-science area, they are mandating not only that scholars who get and researchers who get federal grants have a very detailed archiving plan in their proposal, but they are also calling on the requirement that they build libraries and librarians into their research teams. Are we ready for that? Similarly, do we see the ability to enrich research through the area of text mining? Not just the extraction of words or phrases. We've done a lot of that in humanities centers and tech centers in our libraries for a long time. More importantly is, can we use and develop new technologies to look at meanings and patterns, the linking of objects? Will we participate in the development of an open text mining interface standard? The publishers, and although I served on the Spark board and as its chair for 6 years, I also sit today on the Elsevier board. You've got to be on the inside to understand where they're going. And this is being taped. It's their publisher model. This is their business plan going forward. Not the continuing development and distribution of journals, but to mine the rich and extensive database of scholarly information that they own. And is this something that we also, as the scholarly community, ready to give away? We've been like a Greek chorus, standing on the side of the stage for 30 years. We've been screaming at the academy, we pay too much, we give too much away, it takes too long, and you don't care about this. And what was the cereals crisis became the library crisis, and I would argue that because of our continuing attention, this has become, in fact, a scholarly communication crisis. Why do our faculty, why do our researchers have this urge to publish? Clearly, they see it as a tool for communication. It's part of the academic culture in which they've been raised. It's a way to preserve their ideas. For very few is it a source of profit. But most importantly, it's the way their careers are built. It's how they achieve prestige and recognition and promotion and tenure. We can acknowledge the extraordinary roots of dysfunction, the commercial interests that dominate scholarly communication, the control of price and access, and the reliance on single source. I could probably, and I went through, what's it called? There's an area that it's called Restaurant Ghetto.
Gourmet Ghetto.
What is it? Gourmet Ghetto. I went through Gourmet Ghetto, and I said, okay, there's 100, 200 restaurants within a few blocks of this campus where I can go and buy a hamburger. And I can decide, you know, what kind I want, what quality, how much I want to pay, with what ingredients, and I can make that choice, and I can put my money where I want. When you buy a journal, you don't have that choice. You generally have a single source. You may have multiple vendors, but you want the content. You got one place to go. And that's a dysfunctional market. And that market is getting smaller and smaller as consolidation takes place in that publishing industry. We need to develop a new economic model, a new sense of competition. I don't know if open access is the right framework. But what we do know is that we remain really focused in the library community on easy distribution and reuse of scholarly information. That's what we want. We want innovative applications of technology, not doing things we've always done before. We don't want to give up quality, and we need to focus on that issue of market archiving. Will we be Darwinian and sort of see what survives? Will we be capitalistic and develop alternative journals and see if we can go head-to-head and capture the market against the major publishers? Or will we be socialistic and bring the means of scholarly production back into the academy? That's what's being talked about across campus in terms of the role of the university as publisher. I think this is an extraordinary and continuing opportunity for libraries and librarians to partner with the research and faculty communities on our campuses and keep the heat on the publishers and drive some new approaches and some new models. In the work that I've displayed, we captured the broad input from faculty in 35 academic departments at Columbia in the School of Arts and Sciences and Engineering. And we wanted to try to understand what their current state of thinking was and where they were concerned. What did we learn? We learned that scholarly publishing issues are, in fact, being talked about among faculty and among research groups. We were not speaking to a naive or uninformed audience. There's a passionate concern about the extended research presentation, the scholarly monograph. They see some continuing role for subventions and subsidies for publication. They've seen it in grant fields, but particularly in humanities fields for the book, but recognize that this is not a long-term tool for sustainability. They are very concerned that the need to get published is having an impact on the research topics that they choose to work on. I was startled to find a PhD at Columbia who had done his dissertation work in medieval German grammar, now doing all of his research on German film of the 20th century. His excuse, I need to get tenured, and I cannot get published in the field that I was trained in. They recognize the migration and the coexistence of print and electronic. They largely embrace it and understand it. They want everything online. We all know this. These big packages that the publishers are making available to us are greeted with glee by faculty and students in all disciplines. They're very concerned about the Google and the search engines and their involvement. Look at the article in this week's New Yorker magazine by a very distinguished Princeton scholar talking about this whole development. They want the continuing ability not only to follow links in the electronic environment, but as we move more and more of our content off-site, as trite as the issue of browsability is, they are passionate about it, and we need to think more creatively, perhaps, about what browsability means in an online analog environment. Many fields, more than I could have imagined, are operating with preprint and disciplinary repositories. I asked a question today at the university's publisher, what relevance is the package? Who cares about the journal? It's a tool for promotion and tenure, but it's not where readers start. Readers start in many disciplines, in many fields, in these disciplinary repositories. We talked about open access models, a new sort of refreshing understanding of the importance of long-term archiving, and what I've learned is happening at Berkeley, and what I know is on the minds of faculty at Columbia is whether faculty continue to retain their copyright, whether they make the choice as the developer, as the owner of that copyrighted, or whether they are a work for hire in the modern university. We are advancing the open revolution. The rhetoric of our field around open source, open standards, open archives, open linking, open courseware, open knowledge, open access, open sesame, if you will, this need for barrier-free access, challenged, as we know, by technology, digital rights management, by laws and legislation, unfavorable copyright laws, by the norms of the academy. This is what we do. We give our content away to publishers, and also the marketplace, the cost of access to this information. We are finding ways to advance the repository movement. And what is, I think, challenging to us is the array of environments in which this information is being deposited and accessed. Not just discipline, not just institutional, but increasingly department and schools, personal websites, government repositories, in some parts of the world, national repositories, and of course, the publisher repositories that we license. How will the growth and the scope and rigor and diversity of these repositories reshape the work of libraries and the academy? What is the reliable version? Which one will be cited? Which one will be changed? Which one will be archived? I think these are extraordinary issues for the library community to work on and to consider. Lessig, I think, Larry Lessig, in the neighborhood, has spent a lot of time looking at this, and he affirms these issues of the impact of the marketplace, of law, on the behaviors and norms of the academy, and the increasing influence of technology on limiting effective access to information. Therefore, we as librarians, I think, need to take more responsibility for the information policy agenda. Yes, we have been focused on issues of intellectual freedom and privacy, and certainly the events of 2001 put a lot of our attention as librarians on issues of civil liberties. We advocate for educational and research funding at the state and national level. Who has access to internet? What telecommunications policy says about how much they pay? Will government information survive? Will there be sufficient workforce, IT expertise workforce in this country to take on the responsibility? We have a critical role. We have relied too much on one or two people in Washington to carry the water for the academic research library community in many, many of these debates. Perhaps the most critical area has been our ability to fight the copyright wars. Not too long ago, I published a paper in American libraries entitled "Copyright is Dead, Long Live Copyright." And the first line of that paper, and you'll know when I wrote it, the academic research library is confronted by a copyright access of evil. The editor made me do it. He wanted people to deal with the copyright topic, which is so much amigo topic. My eyes glaze over when people talk about it, and wanted to capture their attention. And what I argued was that the reason why this is an axis of confrontation is because of the increasing role that international agreements, the World Intellectual Property Organization, for example, plays in influencing American copyright policy. A whole array of new laws and legislation. From 1976 to 1996, there were a handful of new laws. We see 50 to 75 a year coming through Congress. Court cases being decided and influencing. Trade agreements, the World Trade Organization defining copyright in many, many arenas. Recognizing that copyright, in fact, may be dead for a large portion of our work that we make available because we are operating under licensing and contract provisions. Pressures to establish user guidelines. How much stuff will we put on course reserve? How many interlibrary loans will we send out in a year? We need to defy the call for use guidelines, recognizing that these very often become not floors, but ceilings in terms of how we can serve our user community. The role of technology, digital rights management capacities, as reinforced by the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in terms of inability to break through technology to do the work of the Academy, to exercise fair use, to access public domain information. We will be confronted in the next year by Orphan Works legislation, the ability to use works where we cannot identify the copyright owner. Section 108 of the copyright law is being rewritten. I serve on the study group that is looking at the exceptions and limitations to copyright and the need to update it into the digital environment. We're going to see, I think, a continuing bevy of efforts to continue to undermine our ability to serve our users through fair use and through public domain. We need to be knowledgeable in these areas. It's a hard task to be informed and understanding. We need to find a way to influence Sacramento, Washington, and Geneva. We need to be advocates for the community interest. We need to educate our community on these issues, document what happens when new legislation is passed, promote sometimes very strange coalitions with partners around some of these legislative initiatives, and when new models are on the political agenda, open access, NIH, support those models and make them possible. Universities and libraries, I think, must be much more interested in leveraging their assets, looking for new customers and new markets for the educational and research products that we put out. I think this comes under the impact of financial mandates, competitive mandates, prestige mandates. But in order to do this well, it takes development and risk capital. It means rigorous business planning. It means market analysis. And it means building cultural and legal firewalls between the business of the library and the work of the library in serving its core communities. I was involved in the launch of Project Muse, and Project Muse was a 50-50 partnership between the Johns Hopkins Press and the Johns Hopkins Libraries, a very lucrative enterprise for the libraries at Johns Hopkins. The Peabody Library, one of the most beautiful libraries in the world, special collections library by day, party place by night. I did 72 wedding receptions there the last year I was at Hopkins. An enormous source of revenue. Is e-commerce, is business development a valuable source of revenue and a real opportunity to enhance reputation? Or is it a slippery and very naive slope to expensive and diverting activities? I think that's a question we should be asking at each of our campuses. Berkeley is global, Columbia is global. Is the library global? Do we have a very fundamental and distinctive role to play in supporting the globalization work of our universities. Yes, we build international collections. CV Star 2, I have CV Star 1, sits across the quad. We are working with international students and researchers. We know that increasingly faculty research is carried out by global collaborative teams. We face the challenges of language. We face the challenges of different standards, different legal traditions, and different cultures. These are really, really difficult and challenging aspects of our work in the research university. I've watched too many of our peer institutions, as area librarian positions are vacated, collapse them, integrate them. Really, I think, divert and undermine our collective effort in North America to build global collections. Charles Kuralt, the late newscaster, once noted that I can travel from New York to San Francisco and, thanks to the interstate highway system, see absolutely nothing. The infrastructure is necessary but insufficient. We listen to our users, they really tell us what they want. More and better content, more access, more convenience, the ability to do things I've never been able to do before. We're all looking to manage our costs, to maximize organizational and individual productivity. We want to control the technology. We want to participate in the content and service environments. Can we respond to our users? I think that increasingly, all of these imperatives will involve some very increased attention to issues of accountability and assessment. Not how many books, not how many people entered the library, not how many hits on our websites, but were we involved? Did we play a role in successful graduates, in productive faculty, in efficient administrators? This is, I think, a product of institutional expectations, mandates from those who fund us, our governments, and do we have in place effective and broadly embraced measures of user satisfaction, market penetration? How do we measure success? How do we measure impact? How do we know if we're cost effective? And are we designing systems for usability? Do we throw them over the wall, or do we involve our users in an iterative way? We don't know, because we don't have rigorous research and development capacities. We are not committed to the creation of new knowledge. We are not laboratories for experimentation. We are not magnets for new skills. We have missed the opportunity for capitalization of our expertise and our technologies in the arenas of tech transfer. R&D is an important tool for decision-making. It's a way to foster organizational risk-taking. And very importantly, it's a way to attract federal, foundation, and corporate investment. In my view, this is a critical capacity that we must develop over the next 5 to 10 years, and it must be applied to a better understanding of our academic research library programs. We spent a lot of time thinking and talking about our library space and our library identity. I have maintained that we are building the Trump-Loy Library, tricks to the eye, buildings that will have the trappings of the traditional library, but in fact what we are creating is far more dynamic and far more progressive in terms of the use of library space, social space, collaborative space, intellectual space. I have 14 library building projects underway at Columbia right now. In some cases, we're being responsive to the disciplines, the fields that those libraries will serve. And I think in some cases, we're missing the opportunity to really build new and exciting space capabilities. I don't know about the libraries at Berkeley. I would predict that they're very much like the libraries at Columbia. They're overrun with people. We don't have enough places of different amounts, geography, distribution, and variety to support the needs of the people who want to come in and use our library spaces. But having said that, I also recognize that we are too tethered to library space. 50% of our reference desks at Columbia have been eliminated. We're trying as hard as we can to get the librarian into the classroom, into the laboratory, next to the hospital bed. And that, I think, is a tough, tough challenge. As I mentioned, the importance of resource attraction. We have built development capacities in our libraries. We've hired research grant officers. In some cases, we've built new products that move us into the patent environment. Some of us are leasing space. Some of us are selling products and services. Some of us charge for certain services and capacities through fees. I think the greatest opportunity for us is to partner with the academic communities at our institutions and to build more and more co-investment opportunities. One example at Columbia has been our implementation of the Center for Human Rights Documentation and Research, a partnership not only with the global human rights organization community, but also with the 70 human rights centers that we've identified that work across the Columbia community. How do we bring all of those assets together and get those groups to work together and co-invest to build a greater capacity for human rights teaching and learning and for human rights scholarship and research? We've always been focused on promoting cooperation. So much of it is on library systems and local and regional projects and state projects. Few of us have been able to build international partnerships, but we don't collaborate as effectively as we should, I think, with researchers, with publishers, with technology organizations, and with the corporate and business community. We've shied away. One, because we didn't think it was ethical. On the other hand, we didn't think we had anything to offer. I, however, think this is a great opportunity for us to build a new concept of cooperation and reach out beyond our traditional partner community. I don't know what's happening at Berkeley in terms of turnover and recruitment of new staff, but at Columbia, recruitment is a tough challenge. We recognize that professional education has not kept up with the demands of the academic research library. We've had to think much more aggressively about our employment strategies, our staff development strategies, and how we retain people. Are we willing to create in our libraries compensation inequities in order to hold on to the people we need to do the jobs in our institutions? I think we have an emergency condition in terms of leadership development and succession planning. There are countless AUL-type positions around the United States in academic libraries that cannot be filled. In an article that I published and got myself in trouble with a few years ago, I talked about the feral professionals in the academic library, sort of the raised by wolves environment. Librarians who bring not the MLS, but diverse academic credentials. The 20 or so individuals who are librarians at Columbia who do not have MLSs, but who have PhDs, and the language and subject expertise I need to work with the faculty to develop the collections and build the services. A wide range of new professional assignments. In an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education a few months ago, Stanley Wilder from Rochester documented that in AREL libraries, 70% of the professional staff, 70% of the professional staffs are not librarians. They're instructional technologists, they're web designers, they're LMS maintainers, they're fundraisers, they're human resource people, they're staff development people, and so on and so on. And we all have sort of thought over many, many years about how the move of former professional roles to support staff and students has progressed. What is the impact on the future of library education? What's the impact on the values and outlooks and styles and expectations of staff who come to work in professional jobs in libraries? What's the impact on our recognition and respect in the community? What's the impact on organizational relevance and impact? And yes, we did get to 30. I think our organizational models don't work. We've pretty much depended on conventional administrative hierarchies wedded with an academic governance and bureaucracy. I would argue we need to find a way to move much more systematically to centralized planning and resource allocation systems, call it the administration, to loosely coupled academic structures around the library where the true expertise for librarianship and service to faculty and students operates, combined with more maverick units and entrepreneurial enterprises. Groups that have the ability, if not the mandate, to go out there and do neat stuff and to really push us further along. The maverick units that we've created in the libraries at Columbia all have funding at a percentage of their operating budget and a mandate to fill the balance of their operating budget with funding from other entrepreneurial fundraising and grant sources. That type of entrepreneurial spirit and sort of maverick approach to their work, I think, is very exciting and very infectious in the library at large. Too much planning, not enough strategic thinking. Our existing structures and processes in libraries are really built for a much slower pace of change. We have not linked our academic program planning in the library to institutional strategic planning. There's a real gap, I think, between what our universities are saying are important and what we, in fact, are doing. We're not putting our money into the things that we are saying important, and our planning cycles are more linked to fiscal years rather than being strategic across multiple years. So as we think about these various imperatives, about these trends and issues, I think we have to ask ourselves, how do we feel? I think we feel anxious. We have this sort of sense of apprehension and fear. McLuhan, I think, said it best. Our age of anxiety is in great part the result of trying to do today's jobs with yesterday's tools. Think about our library management systems, our online catalogs. We feel disrupted. We have this sort of sense of being thrown into disorder. Christensen, in his Innovator's Dilemma, says one of the litmus tests is that a disruptive technology enables a larger population of less skilled people to do the things that historically only an expert could. That's powerful, and it really calls for a different relationship between us and the faculty and students that we work with. And there is a sense of chaos, a sense of unpredictability in the worlds in which we work. But as it says in The Education of Henry Adams, chaos breeds life, while order breeds habits. I would rather work in a library which is full of life. There's a Japanese proverb that goes something like this. Action without vision, no, I'm going to reverse that. Vision without action is a daydream. Vision without action, action without vision is a nightmare. The point being is vision is insufficient. It must be coupled with effective strategies for action. Albert Einstein, when he came to the United States, it's a great new biography of Einstein out, which I highly recommend, but when he came to the US, he would never fly on a plane. And I often think about that today when I got on the flight in Newark and said, well, if Einstein wouldn't do this, why am I doing it? And he often traveled around by train. And one day he found himself on such a trip, and he had a private cabinet, and the young man came in and said, I'm here to collect the tickets, and Einstein starts to dig around in his pockets, and suddenly this young man realizes who this is. He says, Dr. Einstein, don't worry. You don't need to find your ticket, don't worry. But Einstein persists, and he crawls on the floor, and he lifts up the seat, and again the young man says, Dr. Einstein, don't worry, you don't need to find your ticket. And Einstein whirls around, looks the young man in the eye, and he says, young man, it is no longer a matter of whether I can find my ticket. It's a matter of where I am going. Are we focused on finding our tickets? Or are we focused more and more, I hope, on where we are going? In conclusion, a number of years ago, not that long ago, but a while back, a bunch of library directors went off into the woods in Illinois. Strange experience. Tom, were you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're there. You remember.
It was a mansion.
It was a mansion. It was in the woods.
Yeah, we did
And we sort of sat around thinking big thoughts. which library directors don't often do, and came up with an agenda saying, this is what we think is really important for this group of large academic research libraries. We need to, as much as possible, distribute electronic access to our content, tools, and services. And that aligns, I think, in powerful ways with what we hear from the communities that we serve. We need to think differently about, but create, high-quality physical spaces and high-quality electronic spaces. And I would now add high-quality electronic social spaces. We cannot let go of our responsibility for special and distinctive collections. We've doubled our staffing in our special collections at Columbia because we really think this is what is strategic and important going forward. Linked to this is our responsibility for archiving of digital and analog content. And we've not done enough in this area in the academic research library community. Our preservation programs, when we report the numbers, too often are boxes and repairs and binding, and not enough on the conservation of our historically important collections and on that digital preservation going forward. Global collections, probably 2 handfuls of libraries at most, Berkeley and Columbia among them, that have the will and the capacity to comprehensively build global collections. How can we apply technology in support of learning and research in much more innovative ways and not replicate the analog process online? This means a high-quality technology infrastructure, not only just wires and terminals, but it's people. It's new forms of expertise, and therefore also a commitment to developing our staffs and engaging them much more professionally and allowing staff to find in a much more diverse way, a professional voice, a place to interact with others and to make a contribution. We've got to be in a leadership role in this arena of information policy. We've got to find a way to integrate ourselves more powerfully into the academic fabric of the university, not as servants, not as strangers, but as peers, as partners in the classroom, in the hospital, in the laboratory. And we need to commit ourselves to more knowledge driven by R&D. I think that set of ideas that we packaged X number of years ago holds up reasonably well against the imperatives that I outlined. I've probably gone on too long, but I wanted to sort of share some of the ideas that have been percolating around in my head as I think about the future of the academic research library community, and which I think may be relevant to your thinking about the future of the libraries at UC Berkeley. So thank you for listening, and I hope we have an opportunity to push around some of these ideas, ask some questions, and discuss them. Thank you.
Configuration here. We can see everybody. There are no lampshades in your way. Please raise your hand and just identify yourself. Questions for Jim?
Do you disagree?
I'm Gail Ford. I work for Chuck Eckman Local Collections.
Do you take these or should I take these? Okay.
I'm interested in how you organize jobs to support the huge amount of topics that you're trying to address. Do you have a lot of people working on a lot of, do you assign individual responsibilities to small groups of individuals and they just dog those, or is everybody dipping into lots of things?
Yes, the question was, how do we organize around this array of responsibilities and roles? Are individuals sort of siloed in their particular assignments, or are they organizationally enabled to dip, if you will, into a variety of activities? Did I state that properly? Okay. The answer is yes. I think that I think we're all dealing with what I will call sort of generational changes in libraries. And I think there are individuals who have extraordinarily deep knowledge and expertise, and they have a very valuable role to play in the library's collection and service organization, but they are not interested in, they don't want to, and they're not ready to step into some of these new areas. And I think in large organizations like UC Berkeley and Columbia, there's a place for that. But as we recruit for new individuals, we are looking for individuals who can not only carry out their primary assignment, but who are ready and willing to sort of self-partner, self-initiate partnerships and relationships, both within the library and outside the library, to advance some of these developments. I think the continuing relevance and role of task forces and study groups, hopefully partnered between the library and the academic community. And I think a lot of the things which I spoke to are not, if you will, library responsibilities per se, but being at the right tables at the right time and influencing not just national information policy, not just influencing scholarly community direction, but influencing where CIOs and IT organizations at our institutions are going with their resources and their priorities. So I think it's a combination of influence and expertise and structured and unstructured activity within the library organization. One of the things I often bemoan in our community is the presence of what I call MBC, management by cliche. You know, we flirted with teams and quality circles and you know, all the various tools and strategies that the business consultants told us would work in our library organizations. I like the idea, as I outlined in the organizational structure, is to couple a central administrative group with loosely coupled academic organizations, library departments, with entrepreneurial and maverick teams, and to allow individuals to navigate across those two latter arenas. Yes?
Can you give us a...
Alan, could you...
I'm Alan Urbanik. I'm the Slavic librarian here. Could you give us a more concrete example of what you mean by a maverick team from your institution?
I view the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship as a maverick team. It's structured to do some things, but they don't have, they're shaping their own agenda. They are going out to the academic community to try to define what they are and what they should work on. They are maverick in the sense that they don't have all the resources allocated in the library's budget to do their job. So therefore, they've got to be creative in coming up with strategies for bringing in resources from a variety of sources. Sometimes partnering, sometimes grants, sometimes fundraising, sometimes like EPIC, which is part of this group, putting together new scholarly work for which libraries might be willing to license and pay for. So that's what I mean by that. Kenny Cruz is coming to work at Columbia in January to direct our new Copyright Advisory Office. I view that in some ways as a maverick unit. Yes, it's going to be focused on advocacy and education, but I think it's also going to get a lot of these issues of ownership of intellectual property at the university, influencing national and international information policy, and he won't be, we're not going to prescribe to Kenny what he should focus on. There'll be sort of a broad mission, and his job is to find the strategies and tactics to carry forward that mission. It's unlike, I think, some of the sort of traditional ways in which we've organized positions and way we've organized the nature and roles of departments. You have to catalog X number of books a day and using this set of standards with this level of output, moving it to this office in the library. That's important. I'm not diminishing the importance of that. That has to continue to happen in our library organizations. But I think there's a place in a metadata unit where we don't have a lot of rules and standards in place yet to really do some experimentation and sort of push the edge of what has been the traditional nature and role of a cataloging unit. So I think there are places for it to happen in a variety of settings. Yes?
Jennifer Dorner, Del Moffat Libraries. Betsy Wilson, when she was here, also provided a list of strategic areas that she thought the library should move forward in. And during her talk, said at some point that clearly we weren't going to be able to do it all, plus what we are already doing. And I didn't have the opportunity to ask her, well, what have they given up? Has your library given up?
Well, I think there's a number of things we've done, and they might fall into the broad umbrella of giving up. I think that we've, as a library community, we're doing more outsourcing of some functions. I think we have found ways to collaborate more rigorously in broad areas like OCLC, in state and regional networks, where some of the work gets shared and where 1 + 1 = 3, and therefore we're able to get more done. It means, sometimes shelf-ready books, where the cataloging work is done outside. It means eliminating half of our reference desks and librarians working in a consultative chat and or appointment basis. It does mean eliminating branch libraries and consolidating some of that. We're in the process of collapsing 4 of our science libraries into 1, and it will result in about 1 million books in the sciences being collapsed to 20,000 in the new science library. So it's, therefore, the collection management function has been outsourced to the off-site facility, and I think increased searchability and increased findability of that content, actually, in combination with document delivery capacities. And therefore, the staff having more of ability to focus on the user and less on the management of physical volumes. So those are random examples, and I'm sure there are more rigorous examples that you can cite in the Berkeley community, but those are some things that I would cite. They don't say, okay, huge amounts of money have been saved, but collectively over time, I think they do provide a resource base that can be redirected at other priorities. Yes, Bernie?
Please, Pat.
Pat.
Oh, thank you. I thought you came up with a tremendous list.
That was off time. I'm going to get in trouble with my staff because they're going to see this on the web. So.
What I'm curious about is after you've sort of massaged things around, I mean, in your opinion, is it realistic for any single institution to expect to do all 30 or meet or address all 30 imperatives? And if not, how do you see that playing out nationally?
Yes. Can any one institution address all 30 imperatives? And I would say no, not equally. I laid them out as not as a laundry list. That was not my intention, nor as a pick one from column A and one from column B strategy, but to defining for me the types of issues that across the academic research library community we need to find a way to work on. In some cases, it means investing in someone else to carry out a responsibility for us. In the area of information policy, that's exactly what we've done. We've invested in ARL, which is in Washington and able to deal with lobbyists and staff. To some of us have allocated that responsibility to our government information officers on our own campuses. What I'm arguing is not simply to throw it over the wall, even though the work may be carried out by those individuals, but to find a way to influence what is worked on and how it's worked on and how it's interpreted back to the campus community. That's one small example. So I would say every library of Berkeley and Columbia type needs to find its place in this inventory of imperatives and make important choices that align with what you think are critical strategic directions for this library. But I would argue collectively we are at great risk if we ignore a lot of this stuff because it's fundamentally going to either underpin in a infrastructure way or overplay, if you will, in a policy area what we're able to do. The things like digital libraries, like working with students and faculty, like being part of the course management system, I think they are influenced by infrastructure. And they are influenced by policies like TEACH and fair use and so forth. And so I think we can't ignore those sort of bottom and top arenas if we're going to be effective in the middle. So my answer is no, you can't do all of those. But I think you need to consider all of those as you build your strategy.
Do you have a sense of which ones naturally fall into the local as opposed to the cooperative national effort?
Well, I think working with your resident communities and your extended communities, your faculty and students, to me are the most important. They're the ones that you're paid to help, you're resourced to help, but recognizing that your ability to do that is influenced by these other factors.
Jim, thank you very much. This is not your last opportunity to hear Jim speak. Those of you going to the Lot B assembly tomorrow at not exactly 24 hours later, you'll be speaking.
Okay. I'm going to go home to sleep now. Okay.
And thanks very much to the New Direction stalwarts who put this all together. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.